Alex here with a video on public comment, and I guess, I don't know, we could lump in letters to the legislator that you have and um, petitions and stuff like that. I'm already smirking. I don't really mean to come off cynical with this video. I'm just going to say my personal feeling, and then I'll go ahead and explain my experiences, and also I will justify why this happens. I won't say that it's a shame and shame on them and they're bad people. I will justify it in the end. So, my personal opinion is that public comment is a waste of your time, and sending letters to the legislature or any governmental body is a waste of your time as well. It's probably less of an impact if you send a letter, but at least it's less of a waste of your time. So it's more probably valuable to do that. Um, but both of them, most of the time, you're completely wasting your time. And petitions, they matter if you get like millions of people, and even then, it only scares them into taking some kind of action. It doesn't actually, hold on a second, it doesn't actually scare them into taking the right action. One of the best examples of this, I don't know why I use the word right because people will argue with me. Let's just use this example anyway. During the 2008 market collapse, there was this bailout bill, and a whole lot of people called their congressmen and their senators, and it was so many people. This is one of those rare situations where it's an insane number of calls and letters that it actually freaked them out, and they didn't do it. They listened to the public, but they don't actually take an action that's going to be consistent with what the public wants. They just try and find a way to get around the problem. And so they eventually passed a new bill. They just gave it a different name. They called it some kind of rescue thing. And then they ran like a media campaign to try to change people's minds. But this is something that I've seen in all sorts of areas of the law when it comes to landlord tenant crises, when it comes to even child custody stuff. They will acknowledge that the public's pissed off, but they won't necessarily take the action that's in the best interest of the public. And part of this is because the public doesn't really know. The public doesn't really understand statutes, rules, and case law. They don't understand how the legislative bureaus put together language. They don't understand any of that technical stuff. They really only understand, oh my God, no, don't do that. And that's really the beginning and the end of it. So, or they'll understand something like, we want equal rights. Okay, well, who's going to define what equal rights are? The public doesn't know. They just know they want equal rights. They don't know what that looks like in the form of a statute. So, what I see is um, legislators will just get together and promulgate some laws that are already consistent with case law. I've seen them do that. That's a trick that I've seen so many times. There's case law that already says what's supposed to happen, and so the legislature just codifies it. And then it looks like, oh, look, they did something. They really didn't do anything. Even if they didn't do that, that was still how the law was being applied anyway. And so they do things like that, or they'll fix certain areas, but they won't touch other areas, so they'll leave other areas broken, or they'll fix the statute in a way that partially solves the problem, but at least they can say they fixed it, and then people go away. So even in these situations where an insane number of people do actually contact them, they still don't actually solve the problem. And that's disappointing, but that's what I've seen. So you have a situation where most of the time you're going to be ignored, and then on the rare occasion when you're listened to, they put together a half-ass solution, and that's really just the reality of how policy is formed. Is they just don't listen to you. So who do they listen to? The answer is lobbyists and special interest groups. So I'm like I said, guys, at the end of the video, I'm going to justify this. I'm not going to demagogue them for how dare they listen to these types of people. I'm going to explain why they do this. But that's really the people that are controlling how these rules are made. So, and statutes. And so what's going on is you have very important people for two different reasons. One is they have a shit ton of money. That's the most common reason, is they have boatloads of cash, and those are the people that mostly control everything. The other group, which is a lot less in numbers, but sometimes equally powerful, is there are these groups that really care about poor people. And we're talking about legal aid centers, we're talking about the ACLU, these types of organizations. They're outnumbered, but they do get listened to. I will say that they do get listened to. And the situation that I think, and now I'm going to justify what they're doing, the situation that I think is that they can't possibly listen to all those different voices. A legislator, whether it's a senator or an assemblyman, they really, they're just one human being with a staff. And if they listen to 2,000 people, how does that help them? They have 2,000 people with all sorts of different opinions usually. In those rare occasions, they're all on the same side, and that scares them, and they will find some way to appease the masses. But usually they're hearing different things from all those people, which doesn't help them. They don't know what to do based on people's random opinions, often uninformed opinions. Often the thousands of people that are giving them opinions have no idea how that impact will affect society. And so they just don't listen to them. What they'll do is make them feel like they're listened to. They'll patronize them, but they won't actually listen to them. Who will they listen to? It's the three lobbyists. And whatever, say it's a banking law or something. They'll listen to banks, regulators, and maybe, I don't know, investment companies. Those three lobbyists will come up to them and talk about how this is going to impact things. Oftentimes they'll even draft the statutes. So they'll even do that for the legislator. They'll say, here's the exact language of the law that we need, and the legislator will listen to these two or three people, and based on what those two or three people say, they will decide whether they're going to do it. It's not going to be based on public comment. It's not going to be based on letters. They just shred them. Sometimes they'll send you back a letter that says, hey, we listened to you, but they really didn't. So it's just the reality of the situation that they can't listen to thousands of people with uninformed opinions, and so they've decided to listen to these two or three people. So the situation where things are not as bad, which most situations are bad, the situation where they're not as bad is where at least one of those voices is an organization that cares about poor people. So if a legislator at least takes the opinion of one of those organizations, that's at least something. And usually it's not that they're going to necessarily prevail, especially because those organizations are so poor that they really can't fund campaigns, whereas the rich people can fund campaigns. But at least they listen to them, and sometimes they get some kind of concession. Sometimes they're able to water down an exploitative bill, and you guys really need to watch the video "Fairness versus the Law." Fairness is not a constitutional right. The legislature can and does enact unfair statutes all the time. Most of them are unfair, and that is perfectly constitutional. There are specific constitutional violations that cannot occur, but you can't go to court or go to, yeah, you can't go to court and say, hey, this isn't really fair, and here's why. You're going to lose. They're going to follow the plain language rule. They're going to follow statutory construction principles, and they're going to say, doesn't matter that it's unfair. This is what the law says. It's going to happen. Whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. There are some situations where constitutional violations do occur, but it has nothing to do with unfairness. It has to do with a very specific constitutional principle that was violated. And the different amendments don't really talk about fairness. There are some things that border close to it. There are some things that are in the spirit of fairness, like the Equal Protection Clause and stuff like that. But it's not just an inherent thing that they look at. So I think that this video will probably be very frustrating to people, but at least I'm telling you the way it works. This is not my opinion as to how it should work. This is my opinion as to what I have observed and why I think that it works this way. So I've made as much sense of it as I can, and that's just the reality of our society and our system. So really the biggest dangers in family court are that there isn't like really a lobbying group. There's just, well, besides the family bench bar, And there's other organizations that purport to be in the interests of parents that really aren't. They're in the interests of family court lawyers and sometimes judges, which were family court lawyers usually. And so this legislation, when it comes to family and family court, there's like one lobbyist, the family court lawyers. That's the one voice. That's it. And sometimes they'll maybe listen to the legal aid centers sometimes. I don't think the ACLU and other organizations that are generally there really want to touch it. It's just like the third rail, so they stay out of it. But usually, this policy is decided by family court lawyers. And oftentimes, the legislators just don't have a clue and just blindly trust them. And when there isn't another voice there to say, hold on a second, that's not what's happening, they are only getting one side of the story. So if in the system that we have now in this country, the solution to the problem, as much as it's going to make people sick, is a lobbying group for parents. That's the only thing that would work, is a special interest group that actually represents parents. And regular parents don't have money. Rich parents do, but they really don't need any of this. Rich parents just hire an attorney, usually the best one, and they just litigate their cases that way for themselves, not for the general public, but for themselves. Why would they be interested in assisting the general public when they don't need to? It's a whole lot cheaper to just take care of their own case and move on and learn from it. And, that's just what they do. So that's the answer. And I don't think it'll ever happen because regular people aren't rich. They're not billionaires. And so that's just a sad situation. If people are wondering how things got bad, it's just one voice. There's one voice talking to the legislators. And when you have one voice talking to the legislators, you end up with a statutory scheme that's in the best interest of that one voice. It's not that there's a conspiracy. Like a lot of people think there's a conspiracy, but there just isn't. It's just a one-sided story. And that one-sided story has controlled the situation for all this time. Like I said, guys, you will see some examples where really angry people have caused some changes. For example, the shared parenting, the joint physical custody stuff. But you'll see that the biases that were there still bleed through in other areas of the law. So just because you have joint physical custody designations that are coming out now because the public demanded it in some states, it doesn't mean you're getting the same sort of treatment in other areas of the law, whether it's alimony, whether it's deviations in child support, whether it's contempt of court. That's a big one. In fact, wherever you see discretion, that's where you'll see the bias. That's where you're going to see it. It's where it's going to bleed through. So you don't really have to even get specific examples of me. Just think about your own child custody case and think, where does the court have discretion? And that's where you'll see all the funky stuff happening. That's where you're going to see it. Attorney fees is a big one. They have all sorts of discretion. So that's where you start to see really unfair stuff come out. If you have any other questions, guys, please leave them down in the comments below. If you have reached out to a legislator or done public comment before and you felt that it was constructive, let me know. I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but if you have other experience, if you've gone to the public comment, if you've sent letters and they just didn't listen to you, post that down there as well. People need to see that. It really just comes down to just not wasting your time. I mean, this is a difficult video because it's not a happy video, but it's the truth.